Story time. I'm going to be discussing my journey as a beginner who is learning fashion. This is actually my first time of cutting and sewing a simple dress with Halter neckline. So no insult, please. You can make corrections. So when I was done cutting the front and back piece, I used my office pin to join the neckline, the armhole, and the two sides of the material together. When I was done, I bring out my tape and measured 1 inch. I'm going to be using 1 inch to stitch both sides of my material. So when I started stitching the sides of the material with my 1 inch, immediately sewing, I started removing my office pin so that my office pin will not affect the needle of my sewing machine. So I was busy sewing and sewing and sewing. As you can see, I will remove my office pin and then I will sew again. I used my tape to measure 1 inch again to make sure that the up and down is 1 inch, not up 1 inch, down 2 inch. And then I measure 1 inch from another material. So I'm going to be using that to turn my armhole. So I put the material at the back of the material and then I stitch it together. So I'm going to be using this like a form of bias. The same way you use your bias on your dress, that's the same way I'm going to be using this material for this dress. When I was done stitching it together, I turned it and mashed it at the front together to make everything look perfect, so that it will be nice and all. So when I was done with this, I opened it and I can see that everything is going well. I was happy because this is actually my first time of making this type of dress. And then this part that you are looking at that looks like V, I bring out another material and use it to turn the neck. I place the material at the front and stitch it together. When I was done, I used my scissors to cut it, which is I then use my scissors to notch the both sides of the V pattern, and then I turn it to the back. When I was done turning the material to the back, I use my machine to sew the front so that the material that I turned to the back will not come to the front again. And when I was done with this, I measured 3.5 inch. I'm going to be using this for my neckline. I join both sides of this material and then turn it to the other side. So I'm going to be joining it with office pin, and then I notch the center of my front neckline and also notch the center of this neck of this material I'm going to be using to do the neckline. And then I added the notch part with the notch part together and then use my office pin. So when I get to the back, I took out the last side, which is the last side of this material I'm going to be using to do the neckline, and stitch. I use my office pin to join them together. So as you can see, I'm done. I placed them on my sewing machine. So when I placed this material on my sewing machine, I started sewing and sewing and sewing. So when I was done sewing this, I was like, I hope this will come out well. And then I turned it this other side, which I did not stitch. That's where I turned it to the front, and then that's what I'm using to sew this front, to cover the stitching that I stitched before so that it will not show. So when I was done, I'm going to be using this material that I'm stitching. This material I measured 5 inch. I'm going to be adding it at the under of the gown that I'm sewing. I'm going to be using it as form of a printed material. So when I was done, I added it to the under of the dress and started making my printing, my gathered printing. So I stitch and stitch and stitch. I was busy printing. The thing was taking my time. I wasn't able to video all the parts because it took me lots of time to do this down part. So when I was done with it, I opened the material and I saw that everything was looking fine. As you can see, everything is looking good, perfect. I was happy. And then I added my flap to the neckline, which I just stitched, and then I used my sewing machine to stitch it again. As you can see, this is the outcome and this is the final result. Please rate me from 1 to 10 so I will know where to improve.